Just going to just make a few remarks about the brief reading this week. It is only an excerpt from a long paper by David Chalmers. If you want to get a fuller account of what he thinks about the different aspects of the singularity or the possibility of the singularity, you should take a look at the video. I don't really think that there's much need for me to make any comment. I think because unlike last week, which was a wide-ranging survey by Nick Bostrom of different aspects of the singularity, it really focuses, and I meant it to focus, that's why I gave you an excerpt, on one question, and that's how we should respond to the emergence of a superintelligence. And in a very interesting way, I think Chalmers, these may not be the only four options, but it seems quite plausible that they are four options to the presence, the new presence, the emergence of a superintelligence. And he lays them out at the top there: extinction, isolation, inferiority, or integration. Now, of course, extinction is pretty much off the board for him. It doesn't seem like a rational choice for anyone. But when you do the assignment this week, which asks you to, think about the four options that he gives, again, they may not be the only four options. We have to keep that in mind, of course. But thinking about the four options that he sees, choose the one that you think is the most proper one, the correct response. I don't happen to think that extinction myself is a rational choice, but there are rational people who do think that way, that extinction might be not only inevitable for the human species, but a rather benign occurrence for the universe. I don't happen to think that way, but there are always any number of people who do think that way. So feel free to choose that and to defend it as an option. The other three, the ones that he does take seriously, isolation, inferiority, or integration, are the ones that that he does take seriously. And of course, he chooses integration. And this is why I gave it to you, because it's really rather a radical idea, but that's okay. I mean, we're talking about a radical idea already, the idea of a superintelligence, the idea of the so-called singularity, thinking through the ethics of it. But his wild idea, in response to that wild idea, may be quite proper, and that's that we integrate. That is, we put ourselves in a position of parity and some kind of equality with the superintelligence. And that the only way to really do that would be to, as he says, dispense with our biological core entirely. Don't need to point that out, but there it is. And that would mean basically what he means by dispensing with our biological core is to cease to be organisms and to become, like the singularity, presumably digital creatures, digital beings. Basically, that to avoid the first two choices that he considers, isolation and inferiority, we would need to cease to be human creatures in any kind of biological sense, or animals. That is, if we were to achieve integration, which would necessitate parity, some sort of equality with the superintelligence, that is, to keep up with the superintelligence and to avoid the second, the third option, but the second viable option, in his opinion, after, we exclude extinction, inferiority. That is, being second-class creatures, being clearly outclassed in every sort of intellectual, at least, respect by the by the superintelligence, we could no longer operate the way that we do. I mean, there couldn't be a more radical idea than that. I mean, Chalmers is a little coy in his presentation of it, where he, at least here, does not really acknowledge just what in some sense, crazy idea it is that we would cease to have bodies in at least the normal sense. I mean, all sorts of things, of course, open up if we grant the occurrence of a singularity. An uploaded mind could be downloaded into several bodies, I suppose. Or maybe that doesn't make any sense. I don't know. But that at least in some way is possible and has been explored in any number of science fiction, comic book things. I mean, if you get into this idea of mind uploading, then it's been treated in a fictional way, science fictional way, in any number of instances. So it's not virgin territory here. But he is rather coy in the way that he states it. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, if you're exploring an idea and you're trying to explore it logically, then there's no need to get all dramatic about it, I suppose. The drama comes later. And the drama is really for an ethicist, and I don't think Chalmers is an ethicist. I'm not really terribly familiar, but I don't think that is his so-called specialty. And let's face it, he's no Hans Jonas. And I don't think he tries to be. I mean, he's engaged in a very different sort of project or set of projects as someone who's trying to understand consciousness, so-called philosopher of mind, rather than somebody like Hans Jonas, who's, I don't know what kind of philosopher you would call him. But it is Jonas that I think is the obvious retort for us, the obvious response to this. Jonas is, the Jonas thesis in technology and responsibility. It's just these sort of eventualities, these sort of decisions that Jonas saw as part of the new technology. The new technology, of course, is not just more powerful with regard to non-human nature, it's more powerful with regard to human nature in the kind of choices that we would be faced with in this case are just the kind of choices that Jonas was counseling us about in 1973 with regard to technological interventions in our own nature. And this would, I think, be an interesting question for Jonas, the question of mind uploading, and the question, I think, Chalmers puts it quite helpfully, dispensing with our biological core. Chalmers recognizes that that's a radical idea. With all sort, he must concede that this is just the sort of thing where we cannot really think through and anticipate all of the consequences. We don't know what the consequences would be if we were to do something as radical as this. And again, I'm not a philosopher of mind. I am not a computer expert, and I'm not a theoretician in these respects. So I do not know if this even really makes sense on a technical level, whether this could be done. We're sort of looking at these things primarily in an ethical way, and as far as possible, sort of granting that they are at least possibilities and trying to see it from that concentrating on the moral or ethical aspects of it. But this is just the sort of thing that Jonas, I think, would say, according to the thesis, that we have to be excessively humble and careful with these sort of decisions, which will have permanent and unforeseeable consequences for the human species, for the future. I don't think that decides the matter. I don't think it decides the matter at all. But let's face it, Hans Jonas was a humanist, and he had a real aversion to anything that would change human nature. I think that is part of what being a humanist is. is valuing the human and what we recognize now to be the human over any kind of interventions that would sort of move us into a post-human existence, which certainly this would. I mean, that is, if you look at the video, he does answer the questions that he ends with here, Chalmers, about mind uploads. First, whether an uploaded version of me will be conscious, and second, will it be me, which are very important questions. I think he wouldn't even float the idea unless he answered yes to both of them. That is, a mind upload, an upload of my brain to more or less replace me would be completely, wouldn't have any attraction at all unless it was conscious, and probably unless there was a continuity of personal identity. That is, unless I knew myself and felt myself somehow to be me once I had been uploaded. I mean, he does answer those in the affirmative in the video, which is one reason to watch the video, which maybe isn't to everyone's taste. I don't know. I said some snarky things or I said something snarky in the comments. I shouldn't have, but I don't think David Chalmers will mind that. It's not. I was joking about the hair and the leather jacket. It's more like he's not the greatest speaker to my taste, but that's just my taste. But these are very valuable questions, and looking through jokes and everything, he's a serious guy, and he's doing, as he said, he's there because he thinks these questions are worth thinking through, which I heartily agree with. So I don't think he would float this idea of integration through mind uploading unless he did believe that mind uploading would both preserve consciousness and preserve personal identity. That is, will it be me? Yes, it'll be the same you, essentially. But Jonas, even though he may grant those premises that it would be consciousness and it would preserve personal identity, would still probably reject it. Insofar as, yes, it'll be conscious and yes, it'll be me, but I will no longer be human. I will be something else. And there we come to, I think, a very great crossroads in terms of our personal thinking about the singularity. Many writers and many thinkers on this, people who have tried to anticipate the kind of questions that we'll be faced with should superintelligence emerge, should the singularity happen, have more or less granted that it will be the most important change in human history because it will inaugurate a post-human existence. That is, we will continue to exist in some form, but we will no longer be human. We'll be something else. We'll be, in some ways, similar to the way we were before, but essentially we will be a new species of being. Of course, that has happened before. That is, if we take an evolutionary view, which we probably should, and fundamental elementary Darwinism tells us that what we regard as the human species emerged out of non-human species. That's how evolution works. That humans have not always been around. They have emerged out of other forms, and that one may say that that process of evolution is continuing, and there will inevitably be a post-human existence for our offspring somewhere down the line, and this would just be doing it through artificial means. So I don't know. I mean, I think that I am not dismissing either the people who welcome a post-human existence or humanists like Hans Jonas, who thinks it would be a tragedy, a terrible mistake. But that would be, I think, one of the inevitable outcomes of mind uploading would be a post-human future. And, that may not be so bad. That may not be so bad, or it may be terrible. I don't know. Of course, there are these other options, again, excluding for the moment extinction, which you are free to choose. But looking at isolation and inferiority, I would say it's interesting and I haven't looked at the whole essay recently, but he says about the second, about isolation. He says, I think that the second option will also be unattractive to many. It would be akin to a kind of cultural and technological isolationism that blinds itself to progress elsewhere in the world. That is, if we isolated ourselves from the AI plus or the AI plus plus, from the superintelligence, that would mean somewhere or another we would have to contain the superintelligence and isolate it from our own world, or we would have to contain ourselves somewhere or another to throw up some kind of barrier between what the superintelligence was doing and how we were living our lives. That is, to have no communication. Of course, what would that would mean is that whatever the superintelligence developed in terms of new technologies, innovations in the social world, as Bostrom put it, that we would not be able to enjoy the fruits of those things. So that we would be basically relinquishing any technological, social, moral, political, et cetera, advancements that the superintelligence would develop. And so we would be relinquishing progress. And Chalmers is a little bit waffling here. He said it would be unattractive to many. I don't know. I don't know if it would be unattractive to him. Again, I'd have to look at the whole essay again and maybe take a closer look at the talk. But I think by choosing the fourth option, integration, he is more or less agreeing with this. This is also an interesting Jonas moment. Of course, one of the elements, maybe the main element of the Jonas thesis, is that this would be okay. That is, to say no to technological progress is part of that thesis, or the willingness in some cases to say no to it is definitely part of that thesis. That thesis says that we cannot anticipate all of the possible effects of these new technological innovations, and that we have to be humble as a result, knowing that we cannot know everything that we need to know. And that would be a meaningless thesis unless it said that in some cases we should say no to technology as a result. That is because in some way or another we could not anticipate the effects. We should forego the technological innovation. The thesis becomes empty without that. So I think from Jonas's point of view, if first of all, I think he probably would say that we shouldn't pursue, that we should try to prevent the singularity. Bostrom's question at the end of his essay last week. But if it were to happen, I think that he would say that perhaps isolation is the best option. I don't know, because it would be the most careful option, because it would be the least risky option, because at least it would allow us to preserve what we value in our existing world, rather than roll the dice and hope that the superintelligence would provide us with a better world, but also the risk that it would destroy what we take to be valuable in our own world. Inferiority is another option, of course, and that's also an interesting option, where the third option, Chalmers says, may be unworkable given that the artificial systems will almost certainly function enormously faster than we can. And in any case, it threatens to greatly diminish the significance of our lives. Of course, there's two dangers there. One is that because the AI would be so much more powerful than us, we may be at risk of the kind of, let's say, extinction or maybe oppression on the part of an AI. But even if it were a benign AI, it says threatens to greatly diminish the significance of our lives. That is, a lot of that has to do with us. We would have to admit that we were no longer at the top of the, cognitively at least, at the top of the animal kingdom, or the top of the kingdom of conscious creatures, you might say, because AI would not be an animal. That it would be superior to us. And this may, in some way or another, diminish the significance of our lives? I think that really needs to be thought out. That is, would it be so bad? Would it be obviously bad to be second best in terms of recognizing that there was a greater creature of some sort than us in the universe? I'm not really sure. I don't know really why, on the face of it, that would be so terrible. Uh, and again, there's all sorts of science fiction explorations of this, but I guess it would be something you'd have to figure out for yourself, whether you think that on the face of it, being second class, you might say, cognitively, intellectually at least, would really be such a blow to human consciousness, something beyond pure egotism, that it would really diminish the significance of our lives. I don't know. I think that really needs to be worked out more. So I'm sorry to make this longer than I thought, but a really interesting question, and really something for you to figure out for yourself.